Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday, June 22nd, 2018. Today, we want to talk a little bit about some of the emerging issues facing farmers in relation to U.S. ag policy. Today, we're not going to talk about trade and some of the interesting trade negotiations that are happening around agriculture, but instead we're going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, where we're at. The House of Representatives yesterday passed their version of the Farm Bill across the full House by a vote of 213 to 211. So a relatively close vote in perspective to how many members of Congress there are. All the Democrats that voted yesterday voted no against the bill, largely opposing the Supplemental Nutrition Work Requirements, which the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is the old food stamp program. The Republicans largely crafted a bill around creating work requirements for people that hadn't had work requirements or able-bodied working adults in the previous Farm Bill. And so that's big disagreement and a difference between the two bills. Today I want to talk a little bit about the current Farm Bill that we're in, as the crops that are in the ground right now are under the coverage of the 2014 Farm Bill. A couple of the areas of sticking points of concern between the Senate version of the bill that passed committee last week and the House version that passed the full House chamber yesterday. If we get to a point of conference committee, there will be some differences that need to be worked out, and hopefully we can cover a couple of those issues today. And then wrapping up with just a little bit of a summary and the likelihood that we get a Farm Bill passed before the deadline. Keep in mind the current Farm Bill expires on the last day of September of 2018 as the fiscal budget year starts on October 1st. And so we're currently covered through then. The marketing year for this year continues through August 31st of next year. So the crop that's in the ground and its marketing year are fully covered under the current Farm Bill. But as we look for decisions around planning and managerial decisions going into next year, some of that will need to be changed, or excuse me, it will need to be set in stone to provide certainty to farmers as they're making decisions, planning and marketing decisions for the next cropping year next year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. If my slides will advance. There we go. So I do want to start a little bit with the 2014 Farm Bill. For the most part, this bill has worked for producers, corn and soybean producers in the Midwest and wheat producers in the Midwest. However, cotton and dairy are two areas where the program has not really worked to their liking, and those groups have been a little bit upset with the current bill and the program surrounding theirs. As you'll remember, the United States was sued in a lawsuit by Brazil over a case of our cotton program and our old policy. And so, in the 2014 Farm Bill, cotton was given their own policy, the supplemental or the STAX program, and it is an insurance program that producers bought into. Is basically an extension of crop insurance, and it just really hasn't worked. And then the other area sticking point was in relation to dairy. The margin protection program, or the MPP program, just largely didn't provide as much of a safety net as what people had hoped. Producers largely didn't sign up for the program. However, the budget bill that was passed earlier this year, so the Budget Act of 2018, went in and made a couple of changes to those two programs. The other big area that came out of this last Farm Bill that's really probably going to affect this Farm Bill a little bit is there's a lack of consensus for alternatives. And so while most of the producers in corn and soybeans are relatively happy with the way their programs have worked for them, the 2018 bill will largely look a lot like the 2014 Farm Bill, and for those commodities, largely because there aren't agreements on what an alternative program should look like. We could also make that same case on the dairy side. It's hard to come up with an alternative for dairy with the amount of money that's associated to that program. And just really honestly, the variation in large producers and small producers and the needs and the needs of those sectors, that division in large and small producers, and how a program could work for both of them. One of the things I mentioned, the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, one of the things it did is it went in and it did allow cotton to be considered a Title I commodity, allowed the cotton seed to be considered an oil seed product under the price loss coverage program, set it at a reference price of roughly 15 cents a pound, which is that black line up here. If you look at this red line, this is what the projected market price is for cotton per seed. And so the way the PLC program works is that a reference price, anytime the market price falls below that reference price, a payment is made on 85% of the acres for the difference in these two prices. And so if you look here at the red bar and the black bar, every year it seems that the market price will fall below that reference price. And so we can expect payments associated with the cotton program. So these gray bars here are the expected cost of the cotton program. This information, the marketing price estimates, have come from FAPRI at the University of Missouri. And then some of the other points are coming from NASS and reference prices provided by the Farm Service Agency. The expected cost is about $5.9 billion over the lifetime. That's about $1 billion, a little over $1 billion a year. And so the budget bill went in kind of unusual. Usually we don't see a budget bill reopening the farm bill and providing new money, but that was kind of something that was unusual in this go around, and so it went in and added a new baseline for cotton. The other thing it did is it helped make adjustments to the margin protection program. They increased livestock insurance, a little bit of a feed cost adjustment, but then the other thing it did was it changed some of the premiums that farmers paid into the program. This first column here, in both cases, is the 2014, what was under the 14 Farm Bill originally, and the different coverage levels all the way from $4, which would be considered the catastrophic loss, all the way up to the $8. You see it was limited, the break point was below 4 million pounds and above 4 million pounds. The budget bill of 2018 changed that to below 5 million pounds and above 5 million pounds. It also went in and changed the premiums that producers would pay at the different coverage levels. So you notice that the $4 level was considered the catastrophic level, and there was no premium attached. So basically saying, at the most, just sign up for $4. It's not going to cost you anything. But if the margin protection gets down to $4, there will be a payment associated. Under the budget bill, that increased to $5 and then lowered the premium coverages for all the other coverage levels. Above 5 million pounds, so keep in mind we switched from 4 million pounds to 5 million pounds. It went from a no premium at the $4 level, and it stayed at that. And so there was no change at the $5 level, but it did stay, the coverage level stayed at that $4 level, whereas below 5 million pounds, it moved, the catastrophic loss moved all the way up to $5. So a little bit of an adjustment there. We're going to talk about some of the adjustments made in the current bills or before Congress, but this is the schedule that was kind of changed in the budget bill and is what farmers are signing up for right now. And so just something to keep an eye on. In terms of cash flow planning, one of the things that I keep beating the drum a little bit on is the expectation that under the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program, or the ARC County program, which is what the majority of Ohio corn and soybean farmers signed up for under the 2014 Farm Bill, and it's currently in place still today, or the same participation rates are still in place today, is the amount of payments that could potentially be made on the 2017 crop but are made this October. So this coming October of 2018, after the marketing year finishes on August 31st, FSA, the Farm Service Agency, will go through and make the payment rates per base acre of the commodity for each crop. And so as we see here, these are my expectations and my estimates of what payments could look like this October in relation to corn. Payments are made for all 88 counties. These black bars here, that doesn't mean that those counties aren't going to get a payment. There just wasn't a yield available through the National Ag Statistics Service for me to make an estimate. So that's why those are blacked out. One of the things I do want to stress, and the reason I bring this up, is payments this year are expected to be a lot less than last year. So the graphic to your left here is the payment estimates made for made in October of 2017 in relation to the 2016 crop. The illustration on your right is that same one I just showed you. These are what my expectations and estimates are for October of this year for the 2017 crop. And you'll notice that there's big differences. If you look over here, a lot of 50s and 60s per acre to where zeros this year, with a couple of exceptions here and there. Defiance County's got a $10 payment per acre estimate right now. And then Highland County down here has got a 24, and that's largely just because of their yield was, they had a really good yield last year that's still into the equation. But if you look at corn or soybeans, a little bit different. Actually, a few more payments and a little larger payments this year, but soybean acreage in terms of base acreage is relatively low compared to corn and wheat. And so if we look at wheat, again, we see that decrease in payments and frequency of payments across counties. All this is to say is that the last couple of years, farmers have really seen a nice sizable payment in October in relation to the previous year's crops. It's been relatively consistent the last 3 years, roughly about the same size. Given the expectations or my estimates here, you know, some of them might not see much of a payment, if a payment at all, this year. And so being able to plan for cash flow going into this fall, I think will be really important. But the other thing that I would appreciate from you as educators would be also to have your conversations with your local community bank. Because if money's not coming into the farm level, in the last few years, some of that money has been used to pay down loans and pay off debt at the farm. And so some of these community banks have figured that into their demand planning. And I'm not sure they really fully understand the formula of how these commodity payments are made. Farmers probably get it a little bit more than bankers, especially those that don't work in an ag field. But I think it's important for them to understand that we might actually not be seeing that much cash flow coming from the farm community into banks in that October period. I'm not saying the cash flow won't come, but it might not be coming in October like it has the last couple of years. And so I'd really appreciate if you just had that conversation with your farmers and your bankers, just help them be prepared that maybe payments, or our expectation is that payments won't be as large this year and the cash flow might be coming at different times. So moving on to the new Farm Bill, and I have up there the state of the 20 blank Farm Bill, largely because Farm Bills since the 1990s have not passed in the same year that they were introduced. So we've had 5 farm bills that were all introduced in a different year than they were passed for different reasons. The 2008 Farm Bill was vetoed by President Bush, and then Congress overrode his veto. The 2012 Farm Bill ran into a couple of hurdles in the fact that they were reinventing the ag safety net from the old direct decoupled payments to the new countercyclical ARC and PLC programs, which took time and it was a struggle kind of get through. So, you know, if history suggests, it would suggest that we won't get a Farm Bill this year. However, with the passage of the House version yesterday, I think that's at least a step that needs to happen to get there. We have to go through that step first before we can have a Farm Bill in the fall. And so even if the Farm Bill isn't exactly as what you want in the House version, you know, it's at least a step in getting a Farm Bill on time before that September 30th deadline. So potentially getting there. I do want to, since the House has passed their version and the Senate voted their bill out of committee last week by a vote of 20-1, that one vote was Senator Grassley out of Iowa. He voted against the bill largely because it didn't include any of his recommendations to limit payments received by farmers, payment limitations. And so he voted no in the hopes that the bill could come back up and include some payment limitations. It was passed 20-1, and so I think he was working very closely with his House colleagues and making sure that some of the payment limitations he suggested could make it into the House version and there into conference committee. I'm not sure if he's planning on any amendments or they're going to allow any amendments for payment limitations on the Senate floor. I have not seen yet what amendments are going to be allowed for the Senate floor debate. But given that there was largely a huge bipartisan support in the House or in the Senate Ag Committee, I think we can expect the Senate bill to pass the full Senate sometime maybe next week. And then the next step would be for the 2 bills to go to conference committee, to which then, you know, a bill would come out, get passed by both houses, and then go to the president for signature. So looking at a couple of the differences, and we're only going to look at really 4 titles of the bill. We're going to look at the commodity program title. We're going to look at the conservation title just briefly. And then we're also going to look at the crop insurance title and the nutrition title. I'm not as familiar or as good with the nutrition title, but the nutrition part of the bill represents the largest portion, even larger than all the other sections put together. And so we kind of have to pay attention to what's happening on nutrition, as it definitely plays a large portion into the ending result of the Farm Bill. So starting with the commodity title, or Title I, a couple of the differences between the Senate and the House is similar to the 2014 Farm Bill. There are different interests in the commodity title around the crops and the ARC County and the price loss coverage program, and the fact that the South, the southern commodities and corn, rice, cotton, cotton, rice, and peanuts tend to favor the PLC program because it returns nice payments for those commodities. Whereas on the Senate side, a lot of members from the Midwest, corn and soybeans have traditionally, or the last couple of years, have favored greatly from the ARC County program. In fact, soybeans have never made a PLC program. However, the House allows for increases in the PLC reference prices. So the price is set by Congress that if the market price falls below, a payment is triggered. It does allow for the reference price to move in relation to the marketing year average price if the marketing price is higher than, if the PLC price falls below 85% of the marketing year price. This would probably be the biggest impact for soybeans, as we'll look here in a second. Soybean prices have never, the soybean program has never made a PLC program, mostly because their market prices have stayed, or all because their market prices have stayed above that reference price for soybeans. The Senate side, Senators Brown and Thune introduced a bipartisan bill that made changes to the agriculture risk coverage program. However, that bill some parts of it were included in the Senate, in the Farm Bill in the Senate, but a lot of them were not. As Senator Roberts from Kansas has made notion that he would like to stay away from regional differences in support levels or the programs, and not make it about regional differences. And so the Senate side made a couple of changes to the agriculture risk coverage program. It tied yields to crop insurance or the risk management agency yields instead of FSA yields. And then the other thing it did is it made adjustments to the substitute yields that come into the formula. Previously, it was if yields fell below 70% of the transition yield, they were replaced by the transitional yield. That would move up to 75%, or in other terms, it would increase the frequency of a yield getting replaced by the alternative. It left PLC prices where they are at, or in relation to 2014 Farm Bill, instead of doing the stepped up coverage like what the House did. Both bills, I threw this in here, these aren't differences, these are actually similarities with a couple of few exceptions, but both bills actually created 2 new coverage areas for the Dairy Risk Coverage Program. They rename it from MPP to Dairy Risk Assistance Program, and add coverage levels of $8.50 and $9. The other thing that does is by adding in higher coverage areas, it increases some of the premium rates that we see for the lower coverage areas. So earlier I showed that the Budget Act lowered those coverage levels to make it more affordable for producers to enroll. These bills actually create 2 new coverage levels, so allow farmers to buy higher coverage but at higher premiums as well. The Senate bill does add in premium discounts for farms of less than 100 cows and less than 450 cows to help provide assistance to the premium rates for small operations, because there are large differences, large economies of scale in dairy. The House bill, I talked a little bit about payment limitations. The House bill actually relaxes some of the payment limitations. They allow cousins, nieces, and nephews to be considered for payments, eligible for payments, not just active farmers. So they kind of redefine and loosen some of the regulation or the rules around who's considered an active farmer. Whereas the House actually tightens a couple of the payments. They tighten the means testing for commodity payments from $900,000 down to $700,000. And so this will actually trigger some of the some people that receive payments. We can later look at how many acres of each commodity it would take to meet these means testing. It is based on an enterprise basis. And so depending on how many acres of a certain commodity actually hit those triggers, but it moves it from 900,000 down to 700,000. Senator Grassley's amendments would actually go a little further, but like I said, those weren't included in the Senate bill, and he's hoping to get it to where they can be in conference committee as well. Looking at the Conservation Reserve Program, this is probably out of all the other titles besides nutrition and maybe the energy title that the House did away with, the conservation title might be the largest area of disagreement outside the nutrition title. The House took this Conservation Reserve Program and increased acreage 5 million up to 29 million from the current cap of 24 million. Whereas you see over here on the Senate side, they increased from 24 million acres up to 25 million. A couple of things about the CRP program. One, it takes land out of production, and so that puts upward pressure on commodity prices. However, our friends in Russia and South America are not taking land out of production, so they're benefiting from a higher world price without having to take land out of production. The other thing it does is CRP removes land, puts it as set aside, and makes land less available for young and beginning farmers. And some of those land transition, it decreases the amount of land up for sale and rent by some of these young farmers that are trying to get started off. To help pay for this, because you're basically increasing the cost to the government by increasing the set aside, the House proposes that rates will be made at 80% of the county rental rate, instead of 88.5% on the Senate side for their $1 million difference. The other thing interesting on the House, and we might need to talk a little bit about the legal aspect of this because it's not apparently clear, but the step down re-enrollment rate. So each year that or each time a parcel of land comes up to re-enroll in the Conservation Reserve Program, it's actually 20% less than the previous year. And so if you enrolled first this year in Conservation Reserve, if this bill goes through, but if you enroll, your rate is 80% of the county rental rate, whereas the next time you would enroll it, when it would come due again 10, 15 years from now, you would get 60% of the county rental rate. So this is in an effort to change some of the land that has historically been in Conservation Reserve, grasp the benefits from land that has been set aside and higher organic matter and things like that. But the interesting thing, the reason I bring up the legal aspect is it's not clear to me at what point does that start with that step down rate. So if land's been in CRP the last, 20 years under different bills, and it's up for re-enrollment under this time, is that counted as its first re-enrollment, or is that counted as its third and fourth re-enrollment? And so I'm not 100% sure, what that means in terms of the price that they would receive in rental rate. And we will need to be able to make sure that that's clear and that there's actually, an indication there. The other thing that the House bill does is it eliminates the Conservation Stewardship Program. This program has about 70 million acres enrolled in the program. Those acres would remain in there until they are phased out, until their re-enrollment period comes up. It does not allow new acres to be enrolled, and so that's kind of it'll eventually kind of be phased out. But it does expand the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. This program, as I have over here on the Senate side, this program has largely been favored by livestock producers. At 60% of the program has to go to livestock operations, and then I think it's 15% has to go to wildlife. And so the crop portion of the Environmental Quality Incentive Program is a lot less, but it does expand it, and it does authorize programs for on-farm research around water quality. And so CSP would be gone away, but some expansion there on the Senate side. They keep CSP. It does cap enrollment at 8.8 million acres, down from 10 million. And it would expand EQIP as well up to 1.5 or almost 1.6 billion, but it would move that livestock rate down from 60% guaranteed down to 50%. The Senate has always favored the Conservation Stewardship Program, largely because that was a Senate bill back in the day when it was introduced in the early 2000s. And so they like that program, and it has worked well. The other thing that both bills do, but a difference, is this Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is actually a program that's used quite a lot in Ohio, as this includes some of our water quality and Lake Erie Basin initiatives that we do research with and we get funding for. The House would increase the money in that program up 25 million, so from 100 million to 25 million a year, whereas the Senate increases that program, it doubles its money to 200 million up from the 100 million. So a couple of differences there, but I think the biggest two differences in the House and Senate version are the CRP rate, which would be the cap, and then whether to keep or remove the Conservation Stewardship Program. The other thing that's in the conservation title is Senator Brown's bill that he introduced around soil health protection programs, especially out in the Lake Erie, Western Lake Erie Basin. So that remains in the bill as well. As we go forward. So a couple of big things in conservation. If we look at nutrition, Title IV, this is probably, honestly, this is the biggest sticking point between the Senate and the House, and will be probably the biggest disagreement in conference committee, largely because the House passed their bill, including work requirements for able-bodied working adults and those with small children, to 20 hours per week, and then it increases to 25 hours per week after 2026. And so It increases the age of people that are they're required to face these work requirements or eligible for the work requirements, and so they have to be either working 20 hours a week or enrolled in a job training program. And so down here, my last bullet point is it actually expands the state worker program, which was in trial form in the 2014. We're only a couple of years into that right now, and so there's not a lot of good data or case studies around it. But it does expand the state worker training program and implies these work requirements. The Senate, the makeup in the Senate is 51 Republicans and roughly 49 Democrats. There's a couple of independents that usually side with the Democratic caucus. And so, and we need basically 60 votes to beat out a filibuster in the Senate. And so even if the Democrats if the Democrats are opposed to the Senate bill, much like the Democrats were unified against the bill in the House, it's going to be hard to move. I mean, it's going to be impossible it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to move work requirements to the Senate. However, the president is very much in favor of work requirements, and so the big question remains: will he be willing to sign a shared bill between the two that comes out of conference committee if it doesn't have the work requirements? Reversely, I don't know if a bill can make it through the Senate that does have work requirements, and so I think this is going to be a large impasse. And really, honestly, the biggest reason I see now the bill not making it out of conference committee and passed by both houses before the deadline on September 30th. A couple of things: both bills create duplicate enrollment databases, remove recipients that receive benefits in multiple states. That's seen as cheapening the cost of the program, finding some money to be used elsewhere. The House also creates a 10-cent bonus for buying fruits and vegetables and fluid milk at food and retail stores, so encouraging healthy diets. One of the things that you see in the House is they are adamant that food stamp recipients should be buying healthful foods and not pops and fatty foods. Whereas the Senate side, a lot of times you hear over there that it's the freedom of choice of food and that there shouldn't be these restrictions on what you can buy with your nutrition dollars. The Senate provides $185 million for adults with special difficulties. That does include substance abuse to help fight the opioid crisis, so that is included in the Senate bill as well. The House bill makes a couple of changes to where now recipients have to provide utility allowance or utility bills that are figured into their benefit calculation. So a couple of big changes, but the big one is the work requirements, and it does provide from some opioid abuse money on the Senate side. If we look at crop insurance is probably the one that's really left mostly alone. It does, on the Senate bill, they do make crop insurance eligible, or hemp eligible for crop insurance. This is largely driven by Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. He's been very involved in this bill, largely because he's looking for something that can replace his old cotton or the tobacco acres in Kentucky, provide a per acre return similar to what they were getting from tobacco, and hemp seems to be the commodity of choice there. And so it does establish a crop insurance market for hemp. The Senate also clarifies some conditions and creates new premiums or creates new rates for crop insurance that's on commodities that follow cover crops. It also sets new dates, new deadlines to enroll. So some of the problems out west is butting up against that crop insurance deadline, actually discouraging the use of cover crops because of that early deadline for commodities. And then the Senate also is a big fan of this whole farm insurance coverage, so it actually provides higher premium subsidies. The national average is about 62% for crop insurance, so it provides a higher premium subsidy for new beginning and disadvantaged farmers in that mix. On the House side, they make a couple of changes to the catastrophic risk for the administrative fee. Farmers and producers that are enrolled in the Ark County the agriculture risk coverage individual program are not allowed to sign up for area insurance and revenue insurance now. That would also include revenue insurance, same as under the 14 bill. It established insurance policies related to hurricane is largely seen for our fruit and vegetable producers in the Southeast. And it removes crop insurance education funds for producers. This is largely used in the Northeast. And then it changed some of the yields associated with grain sorghum from the drought earlier in the year that's affected some of the yields used in crop insurance programs. So a couple of differences in crop insurance, but nothing like the other titles, mostly left the same, mostly left similar moving forward. I kind of mentioned this a little bit, but these are a couple other things I think they'll have to work out in conference committee. So these are the reference prices for the PLC and ARC County programs, but mostly the PLC program. Here was the target prices under the 28 Farm Bill. Here was the reference prices under the 2014 Farm Bill. You'll notice a difference because we had higher prices in 14. Prices had come down, so we might see these prices actually reflect the market a little bit closer. However, there are some that they're talking about increasing, like corn. Both bills actually leave the reference prices alone, but I think they could go back in and tweak these a little bit in conference committee. If we look at the relation of the market prices the last couple of years in relation to the reference price, this is where we start to see some of the disagreements and why I think southern commodities are benefiting greatly from the PLC program. If we look at corn, soybeans, and wheat, crops that we grow here frequently in Ohio, our reference prices have been relatively close to our market prices have been relatively close to what the reference price has been the last couple of years. One exception being soybeans. The reference price has been a lot lower than what the marketing prices have been, mostly because marketing prices have stayed relatively high. You might be thinking right now that with this trade uncertainty in the market, that could bring some of these market prices down. Keep in mind that these are based on a full year, and so we're getting late in the marketing year for corn and soybeans, and so these lower prices experienced for some of this trade uncertainty is actually potentially not going to affect our marketing year price and drag soybeans down to that reference price level. However, if you look down here at our southern commodities, their reference price is a lot higher than their marketing prices have been, and so they've been getting the benefit of the PLC program down there. So a couple of tweaks. I think we could see some tweaks. I do not have cotton included here, but it'd be interesting to see what the percentage of cotton would be. I might go in and look at that as we move forward. A couple of things, and this is another area that I'd ask our county educators to really help with a little bit, is going into the last Farm Bill. This was kind of the lay of the land on what we could expect for average payments per year per acre. And keep in mind, this is average over the 5 years of the bill. But corn was seen as the ARC County, that's black bar, being about $30 per acre, whereas the PLC program was about $20 an acre. Soybeans, 12 and 3. And we saw enrollment in those two programs really favor the ARC program based on this projection that ARC was going to make the bigger payments. If we look at rice and peanuts, PLC was expected to make the bigger payments. And as we look at the next chart, this is national participation in corn, largely favored ARC, kind of like what I just showed you previously. Soybeans, largely favored ARC, kind of like what I showed you on the previous slide. But if we look at peanuts, 100% in PLC based on that higher price in PLC, and then rice, 100% in rice as well. And so that's probably not unexpected considering what the payment rates in Ohio. We saw high levels of coverage in ARC across our 4 commodities that we have a lot of base acres of. If we look forward to the next year, based on the expectation that things are relatively going to be the same, I think one of the interesting areas is that the expectation is for a shift to PLC. And so these are expectations of per acre prices provided in the FAPRI baseline book looking forward to prices. And that's where we see corn and soybeans switch to PLC. Again, rice and peanuts very much in the PLC category. In fact, I think the payment actually increases for peanuts. But corn and soybeans, we could see a PLC. So one of my concerns is last time the program was new, producers really didn't know what we were talking about when we said ARC and PLC, and so we had these training sessions across the country, and people came and listened because they had no idea what the programs were, and we got them signed up into ARC. The last couple of years, ARC has made high payments, and my fear is that producers are going to say, well, I did ARC last time, it worked really well for me, and I'm going to stay with that again this year. Whereas this would suggest that PLC, and this doesn't take into account the increase in PLC reference prices under the House Farm Bill. So that would actually increase some of these PLC payments potentially. And so, we're going to need to make sure that we get farmers there to listen to us, not just say, well, I did ARC last time, I'm going to do ARC again, it worked well for me. And so there is actually potentially going to be a benefit, again, of coming to these extension sessions to learn about the choice needed to make. I want to talk a little bit about crop insurance really quick. And so the both bills left crop insurance alone, but the administration, every time President Trump's released his federal budget, it's called for cuts to crop insurance of about 14 percentage points. I mentioned that the national average for crop insurance subsidy is about 62%. His recommendation is to lower that 14% based on just a simple correlation of how many acres, the premium subsidy, which is the black line, and how many acres are enrolled in crop insurance, which is the red line. At a correlation of 93.93, moving a reduction of 14 percentage points would save the federal government about $1 billion a year, but it would reduce our insured acres from 86% down to 69%. So a lot more acres uninsured than what we currently have. And anytime you have acres that are uninsured and we have a drought, it increases the potential for ad hoc disaster payments, which are reliant on Congress outside the program. It's a slow process. Producers might not get paid quickly. And so that's the beauty, or that's the benefit of having a structure in place of crop insurance premiums and large acres insured is, the program works, it kicks into gear right away, and we don't have to wait for these ad hoc disaster payments by the federal government. This is just how much of the program, the crop insurance program, is paid out to the farmers. So this red line is net insurance indemnities. So what farmers pay in premiums minus what they get back in payments, or vice versa, sorry. But then the black line is how much the total cost of the program is. So the difference here would be how much the government's holding in the form of risk and how much they're paying in administrative and overhead costs. So that's where the difference between the two. So the full cost of the program does not get returned to the ag community in the form of payments. Actually, some of it stays within the insurance companies themselves. And this is probably the area of opponents of crop insurance saying that too much of the money stays within private held crop insurance firms. One of the things I've done here is, that rate of how much of the premium should be paid by the government. So right now 62% is, meaning that 60% of a dollar paid into crop insurance is paid by the government, 40% is roughly paid by the farmer. That varies amongst farmers, but as a national average, that's the case. So this red bar here is how much farmers paid in at 40%. The gray bar is how much they got back in payments from the federal government. And then this black bar, this first black bar, is the difference. And so if you look at it, almost every year there's been more return to farm community that's been what's paid in. 2016, we had a really good year. We didn't have a lot of claims, and so it was pretty close to zero. This red striped bar is if we take all those premium subsidies away. And so now the full policy is paid by producers. And so here's how that red striped bar is how much is paid in. And then the gray bar would be, again, how much potentially could be returned out. Now this would change because remember we'd have different acres. We'd have a reduction in acres. But then this black bar is the difference. And so as you can see, really the only years that were positive was 2012, the drought. There was a lot of claims, a lot returned, 2013. But then all the other years, farmers paid more in than they received back from the government. So that's just the extreme case if all subsidies for crop insurance were removed. Not advocating for that, just making the case that there would only be 2 years where actually money would be returning back to the ag community in the form of this program. Conservation, again, we talked a little bit about the differences. This map shows where all the acres are across the country. You'll notice there's a lot of land out west from erosion issues, but also just cheap land. Land's cheaper to buy out there, and so it's easier. Or rental rates are cheaper, and so it's easier to get acres enrolled in the program because you can enroll a lot more acres than you can, let's say, in Ohio, where land cash rents are a little bit higher. This talks a little bit about the enrollment rate and how many acres we've had in the program over the number of the years. The first cap was 37 million acres, and so then it came down, and then currently we're at this 24 million, which is right here. The Senate version would raise it to 25 million acres, and the House version would raise it to 29. But you'll see that a cap's imposed, and then it takes a few years to get down to it because that's that re-enrollment. As acres come up for re-enrollment, they're either accepted for re-enrollment or not based on how many they need in the cap. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward. And then just a summary of everything we've talked about today. So we've had a couple of good signs in that the House passed their version and the Senate looks like they'll pass their version of the Farm Bill next week. There are a couple of hurdles. The biggest version is, and I mentioned this earlier, is there a bill that the president will sign and the Senate will pass? I think the president would sign the version that the House just passed because it has the work requirements. He even tweeted, that was a big win for farmers, and he was so excited to see the payment or the changes to the nutrition program. The Senate will not likely pass that bill, and so we've got a difference in agreement between the two, and that could potentially hold us up. Nutrition will be the largest sticking point in conference committee. However, the conservation title I could see be different. A couple of small differences in the commodity and crop insurance titles, but the House also eliminated the energy title. They just eliminated it. Some of the programs moved to other areas. Some of them were just eliminated. The Senate kept that title of the bill, and so figuring out, okay, what's going to happen there will be very interesting to watch. Again, could we see regional differences show up in conference committee as far as, what to do with the ARC program and the PLC program? As of right now, it definitely looks like the farmers will favor the PLC program, just the amount of payments that'll come out. That does not mean that there won't be people enrolled in ARC or that it's going away. That means that the PLC will likely be favored. And then also what will happen with payment limitations. We also saw, as I showed, the differences the House favors loosening some of those payment limitations. The Senate is in favor of tightening some of those payment limitations, and so what happens there will be interesting. So that's kind of my take on where we're at with the House and Senate bills and the differences and what could potentially happen. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me. My email is brown.6888 or brown, brown.6888, and I can be reached by telephone at 614-688-8686. And so if anybody has any questions or you're curious about what potentially could be happening in the bill and the farm policy, I'm happy to have that discussion. And there's my contact information there. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to talking with you if you have any questions. Bye.